Hello everyone, I am Ankit and you're watching StudyIQ IAS English channel. Today we are going to talk about Article 356, which is basically Precedent's rule in India. Now here from the image you can safely say the three stakeholders: President of India, who is head of state of India, head of government in India, that is Prime Minister, and a head of government in a particular state, that is the ex-chief minister of the state of Manipur. And we are discussing Article 356 today because a delegation of 10 MLAs of Manipur Legislative Assembly, they met the governor of the state and have demanded for formation of a viable government in Manipur. But why have they demanded for a formation of a viable government in Manipur? Because Manipur is under the President's rule since February 2025. So in this regard, how Precedent rule functions, how it is approved, what is the consequences of Precedent's rule, all of this I am going to cover in our today's session. Now you understand, in India, the government we follow is a federal form of government, which means there is a central government and there is also, in different states, there is a state government. And both of these governments, they don't derive power from each other. Rather, they derive power from central law of the land, or the most important law of the land, that is Constitution of India. That is why I am safely saying that India is a federal form of government. But once Precedent rule is applied in a state, then state government is dissolved and the control of state government rests with the central government. So in that regard, let us understand what is a Precedent rule. Now, it is a form of state emergency, which means there is a failure of constitutional machinery in a state, and this is given in Article 356, and more popularly, sometimes it has also been called as a Precedent's rule. Now, there are other terms which are colloquially referred to under for Precedent rule, that is state emergency or constitutional emergency. But what you need to understand, that Constitution of India for Article 356 does not mention the word emergency. The word emergency is only mentioned for the purpose of Article 352, that is national emergency, or Article 360, that is financial emergency. So for state emergency, the word emergency is not mentioned in the Constitution. Please remember that. Now let us understand what are the conditions under which the state government is dissolved and is put under Precedent's rule. The Article 356 of the Constitution, it provides for two conditions. First, given in Article 356 itself, it empowers the President to issue a proclamation demanding for Precedent's rule, provided a situation has arisen in a state where the government of the state can't be carried on with accordance to the provision of the Constitution. So this is the first condition where the Precedent's rule is applied. Similarly, in Article 356 of the Constitution, here, if the state government fails to comply with the direction given by central government for some purposes like communication, like railways, then it becomes lawful for the President of India to hold that the government in that particular state can't be carried out according to Constitution of India, and accordingly impose the President's rule under Article 356. So basically, there are two conditions only where you can impose Precedent's rule in a state. So can you impose Precedent's rule for breakdown of law and order? Please let me know in the comment section below. Right, so these are the two conditions given in the Constitution of India for imposition of Precedent's rule. Now let us understand what is the procedure for getting this Precedent's rule approved in Parliament of India. Now, for Precedent's rule to be approved, it requires permission of both houses of the Parliament, and that has to be given within 2 months from the date of issue of proclamation by President of announcing Precedent's rule. Now, if approved by both houses of the Parliament, then Precedent rule continues for next 6 months, and at maximum it can be extended for a period of 3 years with the approval of Parliament necessary for 6 months or every 6 months. Understood? Now, the part of approving the resolution of Precedent's rule and approving the continuation of Precedent's rule, both of them can be done by both houses of the Parliament by a simple majority. So what simple majority means here? That is greater than 50% of members present and voting in either of these houses, right? So to get the resolution of President's rule approved or to get continuation of President's rule approved, you require this bill or resolution to be passed by Parliament of India, both houses of Parliament, by simple majority, that is more than 50% of members present and voting. Now let us understand what are the safeguards that has been imposed so that the provision of President's rule is not misused by central government. Now here 44th Amendment Act, which was introduced and passed in 1978, becomes very important because this was the time when a new government had come into India after the national emergency and the removal of then Indira Gandhi government, and they created some kind of safeguards for use of President's rule. And this Constitutional Amendment Act, that is 44th Constitutional Amendment Act, it said that President rule can be extended by 6 months at a time only when, after a period of 1 year, only when these two conditions are fulfilled. First condition is that there needs to be a proclamation of national emergency in India, with then only you can approve President rule after the completion of 1 year for 6 months at a time. And the second condition is that if Election Commission of India certifies that it can't hold the elections for that particular legislative assembly in that particular state, then only you can continue the President's rule after 1 year for 6 months at a time. So these two were the safeguards that were imposed by 44th Amendment Act in 1978. Now let us understand what are the consequences of President rule. What happens in a state once a President rule is imposed? Now automatically you can understand by the word, whenever a President rule is applicable, then the President of India acquires extraordinary power in terms of governance in that particular state. First, he or she dismisses the State Council of Ministers, which is headed by Chief Minister, and ultimate responsibility of governing that state vests with the State Governor. Why? Because State Governor is a nominee of President of India, and he carries out the administration of the state government on behalf of President in support and advice of Chief Secretary of the state or any advisor that might be appointed by President of India. So the ultimate authority in the state becomes governor of the state in terms of President rule. In normal circumstances, the government is headed by Chief Minister, and Chief Minister and his government is responsible for administration, but not in terms of President rule. Similarly, it is the responsibility of Indian Parliament to pass any act that regularly the state legislative assembly might be passing in the regular circumstances. So the responsibility of passing any law or even the budget of that state government after imposition of President rule is vested with Parliament of India, and a law made by Parliament or President of India during the time of President's rule continues to be operative even after the end of President rule. Please remember, this is a very important provision that once the President rule is revoked and a new government takes over the control of state government, still then the laws which have been passed during the President's rule, either through ordinance by President or by a law by Parliament, they continue to remain so until or unless they are repealed by the state legislative assembly. Now let us understand how the President rule has evolved over last few years. Then we'll understand why this was imposed after a so long time in the state of Manipur. Now since 1950, this was the year when Constitution of India was enacted and came into force, President's rule has been imposed for a total of 134 times across 29 states and union territories. This was before the imposition of President rule in Manipur. And the most amount of time that has been imposed, it has been imposed in Manipur and Uttar Pradesh, and 10 times each. And in Jammu and Kashmir as well as in Punjab, since 1950, Jammu and Kashmir has spent over 12 years under President's rule, whereas Punjab has been under President's rule for over 10 years. And this is because of one particular reason that is common to both of these states. That is, these states for a longer period of time has been under separatist activities, has seen breakdown of law and order and constitutional machinery due to violence that were committed due to separatist activities both in Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab, and that is why it was necessary to keep those two states for such a longer duration under the President's rule. Now what you need to understand, before the imposition of President's rule in Manipur, the last imposition of President's rule was under the in the government of Puducherry back in 2001, where the Congress government which was ruling Puducherry was dismissed after it lost the confidence of the state assembly. And Puducherry in particular has spent over 7 years under the president's rule, large because of the repeated case of volatile political climate and government losing support in the assembly thanks to frequent political defections. So the last instance before 2025 of president's rule happened in 2021. So you can safely say that the president's rule right now is not as frequent as it was before. I told you it has been imposed some total of 134 times in the last 75 years. So why it has, or the frequency of president rule has dropped down so frequently now? The reason is the Supreme Court of India, especially in the case of SR Bombay versus Union of India case, the judgment of Supreme Court which was given in 1994. Here Supreme Court comprehensively examined the power of president to impose president's rule and regulated it by several measures. This matter actually came to the Supreme Court of India because several instances of central government imposing president rule and dismissing the state government. And this controversy reached the apex court of our country, and ultimately Supreme Court gave its judgment in SR Bombay versus Union of India case, which regulated what are the processes when you can impose president's rule and controlled the excessive power of central government regarding Article 356. Now here, this case was heard by a 9-judge bench of Supreme Court of India, and they unanimously held that president's power to issue proclamation under Article 365 was not an absolute power because it will be subjected to judicial review. Here, the courts, both High Court and Supreme Court, they can examine the decision to see if there is a legality of the issue or mala fide or extraneous considerations or even use of abuse of power by central government, or have they imposed this president's rule through the use of fraud. And if they found certain instances, then they will held that this instance of president approval or president rule is unconstitutional and void. While doing so, the Supreme Court, it acknowledged that the court, it could not weigh in on the correctness of the president's decision, but it can actually examine whether the material supplied to the president was relevant so that the president has issued the proclamation. So here, undertaking or understanding the issue of separation of power, Supreme Court has highlighted that this decision of imposing president's rule is not an absolute decision. Rather, it is subjected to judicial review, and this is subjected to judicial review in case of illegality, mala fide intention, extraneous circumstances, or use of abuse of power. While the Supreme Court can't go into detail or weigh in on the correctness of the material that has been given to President of India, but it can actually determine whether that material was relevant enough for President to declare President's rule. Understood? So that is why it has imposed certain guardrails on exercise of power of President of India to impose the Article 356 or President's rule. Now the court, it also created guidelines to protect the independence of state governments. Why? Because India is a federal form of government. Here, the government of state, they derive their powers from Constitution of India, so they need to be in fruition or they need to be in existence unless there is an extraordinary circumstances mentioned in Article 356 or Article 365. Now it said that even after a valid proclamation, the court, the only state legislature, it will be suspended. You can't dismiss the state legislature, and other limbs of the state government will continue to function unless the Lok Sabha and Raj Sabha, they approve it within 2 months. So once you declare the Article 356 or once you declare president rule in a state, you can't dismiss or dissolve the state or state legislative assembly. You can only suspend this state legislative assembly, and afterward, if the circumstances allow, you can revoke the suspension and allow the state legislative assembly to function normally. Similarly, without this approval of Parliament of India, the court held that dismissing the government would be revived, right? So this is why the court ordered that you can't dissolve without the permission of Parliament. You can only, maximum what the central government can do, it can suspend the state legislative assembly, and if the circumstances allow, or if the decision of the president was already mala fide, then the court will revoke this suspension. Understood? So this is how Supreme Court created or protected the independence of state government, and that is why after this rule we have seen the instances of Precedent's rule under Article 365 or 356, they have gone down quite severely, right? Now, before ending this discussion, what you need to understand that the observations made by Supreme Court under the judgment of SR Bombay case. Now, it said that the fact under the scheme of constitution, the greater power, although it is provided to central government vis-a-vis state government, but that does not mean that the state governments are mere appendage of the central government. Both have independent existence, but because of certain circumstances, we have given more power to central government. So, central government should use this power judiciously, should not misuse this power to dismiss any state government if they are not following their any direction. They can only dismiss as per the provisions of constitution. Therefore, in decades following the Supreme Court's decision in SR Bombay case, the instances of Precedent's rule being imposed, they have decreased a lot, right? So this is why SR Bombay case is very relevant for Precedent's rule and particularly for use of President's power and central government's power under Article 356 of the Constitution. I hope I've made you understand each and every provisions. Now, before ending this discussion, I would want each and every one of you to solve this PYQ of 2017. This question directly relates to proclamation of Precedent's rule in the state, and if you have understood any topic prominently, the only guide would be if you are able to solve PYQs or not. So let me know the correct answer to this PYQ in the comment section. The ones who will answer it correctly, I will give your comments a thumbs up and you'll know automatically that we have gotten it correctly. And if you want to download the notes, these will be available on my Telegram channel called as ATS Live. So what you can do, go to the Telegram search bar, enter the words ATS Live, you'll find the channel. And for some reason, if you still can't, you can scan this QR code. This will take you definitely to the channel. Subscribe it if you still haven't and download the notes. Okay. So this is all from my side for today. We'll see each other again tomorrow. Please have a very good night.